4, 3.
The American Space Shuttle is the most advanced and complex machine ever flown. The remaining shuttles have served out their working life and are due for retirement after 30 years of service. What will replace it? What next to ferry payloads and astronauts to the International Space Station? The European Space Agency has its autonomous Jules Verne, an unmanned self-docking capsule to send supplies to the station. It recently underwent final trials and completed an autonomous docking with the space station, proving its capability.
And after 2 trial approaches, it automatically and gracefully latched onto the ISS docking port on the 3rd of April. Neither the astronauts on board the station nor the mission control teams in Toulouse had to intervene.
Over the weeks, the dozens of white container bags were transferred from the ATV's pressurized cabin to the ISS. Its empty racks and tanks were then used to store the station's dry and liquid waste and excess materials, some 2.5 tons stored into the cabin. It is automatically undocked and sent on its way, hurtling through the atmosphere to be destroyed along with the garbage in a fiery shower. Its mission ended. NASA has contracts pending with other companies, including SpaceX, to supply the necessary hardware to help maintain and supply the space station. Their capsule, the Dragon, now under development, is slated for operations in the very near future. A conventional blunt-nosed cone-shaped design, it will be launched atop their Falcon 9 launch vehicle. The Dragon capsule comes in 2 variants, the cargo only and the Dragon Crew, taking up to 7 crew or a mix of crew and supplies. Designed only for low Earth orbit, the Falcon-Dragon combination could be a low-cost answer to the continuous resupply and crew rotation to the International Space Station.
All systems are go for final approach.
Dragon is on final approach.
Even the Russians are looking past their 40-year-old Soyuz design. It's small and only carries 3 passengers.
For ingress.
The spacecraft is basically a concept from the 60s, and it's getting rather old, and it's also getting rather difficult to produce this type of spacecraft. Therefore, also on the Russian side, we are looking to a new generation type of spacecraft, which is called Clipper.
Clipper is the brainchild of Russian company RKK Energia. They previously built Buran, a Russian shuttle whose development was interrupted through lack of money. A life-size prototype has already been built. Clipper is a new generation of spacecraft. In designing it, we used some of the latest ideas. Since the construction of the shuttle and a former Soviet model, the Buran, a lot of new materials and new technologies have been discovered. We will use up-to-date Russian science in this new spacecraft, and we are ready to use all the European technology we can in the design of Clipper. The Clipper should be ready for liftoff by 2011. It will transport 6 astronauts into orbit and carry 500 kilos, or 2 astronauts and 700 kilos of materials. It's anticipated to start ferrying payloads to the International Space Station by 2012. The Clipper is a slightly unusual designed snub-winged lifting body, with its docking adapter positioned to the rear. There are 2 options for landing, either by parachute in the Russian steppes, or a more conventional way, like an aircraft, if it takes place closer to a populated area.
The aim of Clipper is, of course, not just to bring humans to space. It's also not just the aim to go and serve the International Space Station, but the aim of Clipper is really also in the long term, 20, 30, 40 years from now, to be able to participate in human exploration of our solar system.
Developers also suggest that it could be used to ferry astronauts between an Earth and lunar orbit, where it would transfer passengers to a European lunar landing craft. In part a replacement for the shuttle and part a return to manned lunar flights, NASA have embarked on a project Constellation, which consists of 2 types of booster rocket, a capsule, an orbit escape booster and a lunar lander. The Ares 5 booster is the heavy lift component of the program, unmanned and consisting of a main booster with 5 RS-68 engines, a much larger and more simplified hydrogen-oxygen burning engine than the shuttle main engines, and 2 strap-on solid rocket boosters similar to the Space Shuttle.
Nominal margin is only 7 foot.
The second stage is the Earth Departure Booster, which will fly itself and the Altair lunar lander into a parking low Earth orbit, the main booster returning to Earth via parachute. The second booster is the manned Ares 1, consisting of a first solid rocket stage similar to the shuttle SRB, with a second stage liquid-fueled J2X Apollo-type era rocket engine. It will lift the new Orion spacecraft into low Earth orbit, where it will rendezvous and dock with the Altair and continue its journey to the Moon and later further afield. The Orion is an upscaled version of the Apollo spacecraft and will take from 4 to 6 crew members. It will again consist of a command module for the crew and a service module that will house propellant consumables and main engine. Orion differs from Apollo in that it will be reusable up to 10 launches and will utilize solar panels as part of its power system. It may also be able to land with the aid of chutes and airbags on terra firma, reducing the large cost of an ocean recovery. The Block 1 design will be for low Earth orbit operations to the ISS, Block 2 and 3 versions for lunar and deep space missions. NASA's return to the simpler system than a more advanced space plane was in part purely statistical. Apollo hardware had a 100% success rate, the shuttle a poor 50%. NASA's plan to return to the Moon in the next 10 years requires the 2 boosters, which would deliver the Altair lander, Orion manned capsule and Earth departure stage to low orbit, where they will dock and then utilize the EDS to gain the velocity for a trans-lunar journey. There the crew will transfer to Altair, undock in lunar orbit and land on the Moon. The planned Altair lunar lander will be able to carry 4 passengers from orbit to the Moon and back. Much larger than the Apollo-era lunar module, Altair will be designed to allow long stays on the lunar surface, including an airlock and a toilet. NASA is planning for a permanent outpost similar to the mission style of the International Space Station between 2019 and 2024. This will enable scientists to work for extended times on the surface, where there is still a lot of science to be done.
When the Apollo astronauts went to the Moon, they brought back a load of samples, and people thought at the time that that told you most of what you needed to know about the Moon. Over the intervening time, people have realized that there's a tremendous amount we still don't know about the Moon. For example, we don't know if the Moon and the Earth came from the same place. The way to find that out is to measure the composition of the whole Moon, and that's what DKICS, our little experiment, is going to do.
Numerous probes from several nations are currently in lunar orbit, making extensive and detailed surveys of the surface to aid in this science. One decision is which location would be best suited for a manned outpost. One high-potential site is on the rim of the Shackleton crater near the southern pole. It would take advantage of the extensive sunlight for power production and may also be near a supply of water, which the Indian Chandrayaan probe and NASA's Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter will help to locate. The current outpost design consists of habitation modules, solar power unit, unpressurized rovers, an in-situ resource utilization unit, and a surface mobility carrier. Using the Altair lander and perhaps the ESA equivalent, an incremental build-up could begin with 4-man crews and cargo landers making short 7-day visits, working towards a 180-day stay. An early priority would be to learn how to use the local resources.
The problem on the Moon is there is no free oxygen in the air, and the US require oxygen to power their rockets from the Moon. And to take oxygen from the Earth to the Moon costs about £2 million per tonne, which is very expensive. was to create a process on the moon which will create oxygen from the rocks, which will make that very, very much cheaper.
To be able to manufacture oxygen and fuel directly from lunar regolith would be a major cost saving and enable stockpiles of fuel to be stored on the moon, ready for use for later missions to Mars and beyond. Another key to lunar exploration is transportation, being able to traverse the rugged lunar terrain. Apollo astronauts had the lunar buggy, one of the most costly four-wheeled devices ever built, but it served them well, allowing extensive forays away from their lander to collect a wide variety of mineralogical samples. NASA has a new design ready in the wings. The Lunar Electric Rover is a prototype vehicle that will allow astronauts to conduct research for up to 14 days. It includes 12 separate wheels, a bubble window in the front for close viewing of the surface, and a toilet. In order for astronauts to remain on the surface for that long, they will need to be able to both exercise and relax when they're not on duty, according to engineer Mike Gernhardt, himself a four-time shuttle astronaut.
It's 10 cubic meters in volume. You see the central aisle here. It's tall enough for a tall person such as myself. I'm 6'2.5" to easily walk up and down the aisles. On the sides we have these bunks or benches, and the seats actually fold down to form a bunk or like a recliner. For example, at the end of a long day, you can sit back. We're going to have a TV monitor here. You can do your email, fill out your forms. It's very comfortable. When we see a sample we want to collect, we can quickly come back here. The suits are already checked out and powered up. We open this hatch and we open the backpack or back hatch of the suit, and there is the spacesuit. So you literally, using these handholds, step into the suit. Once you're in there, there's a lever outside that will close the back hatch.
The rover's 6 pairs of wheels can be moved in unison or separately, the latter known as crabbing. The vehicle has a top speed of approximately 15 kilometers an hour. NASA believe this type of vehicle is a significant improvement on the old lunar buggy. Unlike the last lunar missions, the US will not be alone. This time, other nations will be joining in the return.
The space scene has changed quite dramatically over the last 2 or 3 decades. We have Europe now through ESA as a very significant player, and countries such as China, India, Japan, all developing very, very fast with very significant capabilities in space science, space technology, and the application. So it makes the situation a lot more interesting now. Very, very challenging, but interesting.
The ESA, Russia, Japan, China, and India are all looking to manned and robotic missions to the moon, and also building permanent or semi-permanent bases, most by 2035. JAXA is planning a lunar landing around 2020 and a manned base within 10 years of that. China has commenced a lunar exploration program seeking out minerals with the prospect of extensive mining of resources including iron and helium-3.
Working together is a key part of what we've been doing. We've been working with 14 different national space agencies throughout this past year to try to define our common interest in why go back to the moon. What do we all want to accomplish in exploration? So exploration as a unified endeavor between nations is definitely a key this time.
The spirit of the International Space Station seems to have rubbed off, with nations choosing to work closely together for a common goal.
We are trying to play a key role since the beginning, because what we are supporting is mainly to have this consultation process also with other space agencies like JAXA, the Japanese one, with Russia, with China, and with the United States. So this process will bring us to the definition of global strategy and a global open architecture in order to be able to fit in, to jump in with the European program at the end.
And so for us, we love the challenge of someday going to Mars and sending people to Mars. But we see the realistic goal of we need to learn more technologically, we need to learn more scientifically. And so the moon provides us with a closer by neighbor where we can start learning more operationally, technologically to prepare. So that's a lot of why we're going back.
There are so many questions that we can address by going to the moon and Mars. I think we must go to them both. It's not one or the other. The moon, despite what some people say, they say we've been there, we've done it, that's just not true. What we did at the moon in the Apollo era was good, but it was actually quite superficial. We've now got to go back, do detailed studies. We now realize fully that one of the benefits of the moon being actually a relatively inert place is that it has preserved a record of essentially the history of the solar system in the surface, in the rocks.
Mars is the ultimate goal for this generation of space exploration. How and when we send a manned mission is still up for debate. NASA have a tentative timetable for around 2030.
Mars, well, of course, for a long time, Mars has been regarded as the best bet for possible existence, past or even present, of life elsewhere in the solar system.
As sure as it rains, someone will be taking that giant leap towards Mars. The question now might be what emblem is stitched on their armband. Hopefully, by then, it won't matter. With Mars beckoning our astronauts and scientists, the technical difficulties in getting a man there are still daunting. But traveling to the Red Planet is only half the challenge. Staying there is the other half. With so much still unknown about the mysterious small planet, further robotic study is required. NASA is planning an adventurous rover dubbed the Mars Science Laboratory rover, which should, all being well, reach Mars in 2012. The autonomous rover will be arriving in style with a new technique. First, the usual aerobraking entry into the atmosphere and main chute deployment and jettison of the heat shield. Then the upright rover will be hoisted down on cables from the re-entry capsule. Once touching down, the rover will be cut loose and sent on its way. The advanced rover will be the largest sent to another planet, and with a plutonium decay radioisotope power supply, it should operate for an entire Martian year or 687 Earth days. It will carry on board the most advanced science laboratory to date. Its analysis ability will be second to none, with a suite of 5 tools at the end of its arm. 2 are contact or in situ instruments, 1 a spectrograph and a lens imager. It will be able to drill into rock and extract samples. Its primary goal is to locate and identify organic carbon compound. A high-power laser will vaporize tiny pieces of rock from up to 7 meters away, generating a tiny blast of plasma. Spectral analysis of the escaping gases with 2 specialized cameras will analyze the rock surface composition. The rover will scour the terrain and go where directed to take samples. With speeds of up to 30 meters per hour, this rover can maneuver autonomously and avoid dangerous terrain, although it does have a clearance of over 75 centimeters. The rover is designed for long-term survivability, including 2 central computers. One will remain dormant unless the primary computer fails. It will also maintain its own health, monitoring all systems and taking action if necessary to keep itself alive. It will have 10 so-called eyes, 6 engineering cameras for navigation and obstacle avoidance, including a pair of stereoscopic eyes for depth perception, and 4 cameras for scientific investigation. Like previous probes and roving probes on Mars, this one will also be looking for specific signs of life. Within its body is an extensive chemical analysis suite which will receive samples of soil, rock and atmosphere and investigate them for signs of life with 3 main tools: the quadruple mass spectrometer, gas chromatograph and tunable laser spectrometer. The three subsystems include the chemical separation and processing lab, the sample manipulation system, which will deliver samples for heating up to 1,000 degrees, and the wide-range pumps to purge the various sample systems. It is expected that this big brother of the Spirit and Opportunity rovers will continue the groundbreaking scientific work of the two earlier probes and establish once and for all the existence of traces of life, either long dead or dormant, on the planet. Looking further ahead to 2020, ESA and NASA are developing a sample return mission. The complex mission calls for 5 spacecraft: an Earth-Mars transfer stage, a Mars orbiter, a descent module, a Mars ascent module, and an Earth re-entry vehicle. With their proven autonomous maneuvering and docking capability, ESA are planning to land the probe on the Martian surface, where it will drill into the ground and extract samples. Once sealed in containers, these valuable samples would be delivered to the ascent stage of the probe and secured, then rocketed back into orbit for a rendezvous in orbit with the Earth return vehicle. The samples would then be returned in a ballistic flight path back to Earth, where the probe would be secured and isolated for scientific analysis. Every precaution will be taken to ensure no Earth-borne contamination of Mars will occur and vice versa. No Martian microbial life, if it exists, could contaminate the Earth. With the experience gained from returning to the Moon and the ever-increasing knowledge base of the Mars environment, the expected arrival of humans on Mars will be a great technological achievement. But more importantly, the first steps to colonization of the solar system, something the human race is destined to do.